The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets of Millbrook Village as Sarah Chun made her way to the marketplace. Her simple brown dress and worn leather shoes marked her as one of the common folk, someone easily overlooked in the bustling crowd of merchants and customers. But beneath her humble exterior lay secrets that would soon shake the very foundations of their small community. Sarah had lived in Millbrook for 3 years now, arriving as a young woman with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small leather pouch she never let anyone see. The villagers had taken pity on her, offering her work in the bakery and a small room above the grain storage. She was quiet, hardworking, and kept to herself. Nobody asked too many questions about her past, and she volunteered no information. The marketplace buzzed with its usual morning activity. Mrs. Henderson sold fresh bread from her stall, the aroma mixing with the scent of flowers from the florist next door. Children ran between the vendors, their laughter echoing off the stone buildings that surrounded the square. Sarah picked up her usual supplies, flour, salt, and a small piece of meat for her evening meal. She exchanged polite greetings with the vendors who had grown familiar with her routine. As she turned to leave, a commotion near the town hall caught her attention. A group of men on horseback had arrived, their fine clothes and polished weapons marking them as nobles or their servants. The villagers gathered around, whispering among themselves about the unexpected visitors. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat when she recognized the leader of the group. Lord Marcus Blackwood sat tall in his saddle, his dark eyes scanning the crowd with the calculating gaze of a predator. His black hair was pulled back severely, and a thin scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, a reminder of battles fought in distant lands. Behind him rode 6 men, all bearing the Blackwood family crest on their tunics. Sarah pulled her shawl closer around her shoulders and tried to blend into the crowd, but she knew it was too late. Marcus had been searching for someone for 3 long years. The woman who had humiliated him, who had escaped his grasp on what should have been his moment of complete triumph. He had tracked her across 3 kingdoms, following rumors and whispers, never quite catching up to his quarry. But now, as his eyes swept across the gathered villagers, he saw her. The recognition was instant and electric, even dressed as a common peasant. Even with her long black hair, now cut short, and her once smooth hands now roughened by work, he knew her. Lady Isabella Ravencrest, the daughter of his former enemy, the woman who had cost him everything and then vanished into the night. Their eyes met across the crowded marketplace, and Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. She had known this day might come, had prepared for it in her own way, but facing the reality was different from imagining it. Marcus smiled, but there was no warmth in it, only the cold satisfaction of a hunter who had finally cornered his prey. The villagers sensed the tension without understanding its source. The cheerful morning chatter died away as people noticed the way the nobleman stared at their quiet baker's assistant. Sarah took a step backward, then another, but Marcus was already dismounting from his horse. "Seize her," he commanded his men, his voice carrying clearly across the silent square. "That woman is a wanted criminal." The accusation sent shockwaves through the crowd. Sarah, their gentle, hardworking neighbor, a criminal? It seemed impossible, but the authority in Marcus's voice and the way his armed men moved toward her made it clear this was no mistake or misunderstanding. Sarah turned and ran. She had always been fast, even as a child in her father's castle. Now, with 3 years of hard physical work behind her, she was faster still. She darted between market stalls, leaped over crates of vegetables, and ducked under hanging cloths. Behind her, she could hear the heavy footsteps of Marcus's men and his shouted orders to the villagers to help stop her. But the people of Millbrook were simple folk and used to violence or pursuit. They stood frozen as Sarah raced past them, unsure whether to help or hinder her escape. Some even stepped aside, whether from confusion or some instinctive sympathy for the young woman they had come to know as kind and honest. Sarah's heart pounded as she reached the edge of the marketplace, and plunged into the narrow alleyways that wound between the older buildings of the village. These passages were barely wide enough for one person, filled with hanging laundry and cluttered with barrels and boxes. She knew them well from her 3 years of daily walks to and from work. Behind her, she could hear Marcus's frustrated commands as his mounted men found themselves unable to follow her through the tight spaces. She allowed herself a moment of hope. Perhaps she could lose them in this maze of passages and escape into the countryside beyond the village. But Marcus Blackwood had not become one of the most feared nobles in the realm by being easily outwitted. While his mounted men circled around to block the main exits from the village, he himself pursued her on foot through the alleyways. Unlike his heavily armored soldiers, Marcus was lean and athletic, able to move quickly through the cramped spaces. Sarah could hear him getting closer. His breathing, his footsteps, even the soft clink of the weapons at his belt. She burst out of an alley into a small courtyard behind the village church, looking desperately for another escape route. There was a gate in the far wall, but it was closed, and she could see one of Marcus's men on horseback waiting beyond it. She was trapped. Marcus emerged from the alley behind her, no longer hurrying now that he knew she had nowhere to go. His dark clothes were only slightly disheveled from the chase, and his breathing was controlled and steady. He looked like what he was, a professional warrior who had cornered his prey. 3 years, Isabella, he said, using her real name like a weapon. 3 years I've been hunting you. Did you really think you could hide forever among these simple people? Sarah straightened her shoulders and turned to face him. Gone was the humble posture she had maintained during her time in Millbrook. In its place was the bearing of a woman born to nobility, trained from childhood to face danger with dignity. My name is Sarah now, she said quietly. Isabella Ravencrest died 3 years ago. Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. Oh, she'll die certainly, but not until I've had my satisfaction. Not until you've paid for what you cost me. The confrontation was interrupted by the arrival of several villagers, drawn by curiosity and concern for the woman they had known as a neighbor. Among them was Father William, the elderly priest who served the village church. His weathered face was creased with worry as he looked between Sarah and the armed nobleman. What is the meaning of this? The priest asked, his voice carrying the authority of his years and position. What crime has this woman committed? Marcus turned to address the crowd that was gathering. This woman is Lady Isabella Ravencrest, daughter of Lord Edgar Ravencrest, who was convicted of treason against the crown 3 years ago. She escaped justice and has been living among you under false pretenses. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some of the villagers looked shocked, others skeptical. They had known Sarah as a quiet, helpful young woman who attended church every Sunday and never caused trouble for anyone. Even if this is true, Father William said carefully, what authority do you have to arrest her here? This village falls under the protection of Lord Ashford, not your domain. Marcus's smile was sharp and predatory. Lord Ashford owes me several favors. I doubt he'll object to my handling this matter personally. Besides, he added, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, some crimes transcend normal legal boundaries. Sarah felt the weight of the small leather pouch hidden beneath her dress. The villagers saw her as a simple baker's assistant, and Marcus saw her as a prize to be claimed. But none of them knew the true significance of what she carried, the secret that had driven her into exile and would soon change everything. Mrs. Henderson, the baker who had given Sarah her first job in the village, stepped forward from the crowd. Sarah has been nothing but good to us, she said firmly. Whatever she may have done before, she's earned a place here through honest work and kind deeds. Other villagers murmured agreement. They might not understand the politics of nobles and their feuds, but they knew the character of the woman who had lived and worked among them. Marcus's expression darkened as he realized that the simple folk he had expected to step aside were instead rallying to protect their neighbor. Stand aside, he commanded, his hand moving to the sword at his hip. This woman is coming with me, and anyone who interferes will answer for it. The threat hung in the air like a physical presence. These were farmers and merchants, not warriors. They had no weapons beyond work tools and no experience in fighting trained soldiers. But they also had something Marcus hadn't expected: loyalty to one of their own. Father William raised his hand, and the murmuring crowd fell silent. "Lord Marcus," he said formally, "I invoke the right of sanctuary. This woman stands on consecrated ground, and by ancient law, she cannot be taken by force while she remains here." Marcus's face flushed with anger. The right of sanctuary was old law, predating even the current kingdom, but it was still recognized by the church and crown. As long as Sarah remained within the church grounds, she was technically beyond his reach. But Sarah knew it was only a temporary reprieve. Marcus could simply wait her out, stationing his men around the church until hunger and thirst forced her to emerge. And she couldn't ask these kind people to risk their lives defending her indefinitely. "Thank you," she said to Father William and the gathered villagers. "But I won't hide behind your protection. I'll face whatever comes." She walked slowly toward Marcus, her head held high despite the fear that churned in her stomach. The villagers watched in tense silence, many of them clearly wanting to intervene, but unsure how to help. Marcus grabbed her wrist as she came within reach, his fingers digging into her skin hard enough to bruise. Finally, showing some sense, he said, "My men have horses waiting. We'll be gone from this place within the hour." But as his hand closed around her wrist, his fingers brushed against something unexpected beneath her sleeve. Something small and hard and unmistakably metallic. His eyes narrowed as he felt the outline of what could only be a piece of jewelry. "What's this?" he demanded, pushing up her sleeve. Sarah tried to pull away, but his grip was too strong. As the fabric slid back, it revealed a simple copper bracelet around her wrist. To most observers, it would have seemed like a trinket, the sort of cheap ornament a working woman might own. But Marcus's sharp intake of breath suggested he saw something different. The bracelet was old and tarnished, its surface marked with symbols that seemed to shift and dance in the morning light. They were not the decorative engravings one might expect on jewelry, but something else entirely. Something that made Marcus release her wrist as if he had been burned. "Where did you get that?" he whispered, his voice suddenly hoarse with an emotion Sarah couldn't identify. Fear? Awe? Both. The villagers watched in confusion as the dynamic between their neighbor and her pursuer suddenly shifted. Marcus, who had been the picture of confident authority moments before, now stared at Sarah's bracelet with an expression of shock that bordered on terror. Sarah rubbed her wrist where he had gripped it, but she didn't try to hide the bracelet now that it had been seen. "It was my mother's," she said simply, "and her mother's before that. A family heirloom passed down through generations." "You don't understand what you're wearing," Marcus said, backing away from her. "You can't possibly understand." But Sarah's slight smile suggested otherwise. "Can I?" The morning sun seemed to grow brighter as it reflected off the ancient symbols carved into the copper. Several villagers later swore that the bracelet glowed with its own light for just a moment, though others dismissed this as imagination brought on by the tension of the confrontation. What none of them could dismiss was the change in Marcus's demeanor. The confident predator had been replaced by a man who looked like he had seen a ghost. His men, sensing their leader's sudden uncertainty, shifted uncomfortably in their positions around the courtyard. Father William stepped closer, his elderly eyes squinting to make out the symbols on the bracelet. He had served in this village for 40 years and had studied ancient texts in his youth, but the markings were unlike anything in his experience. They seemed to pulse with meaning just beyond his understanding, like words in a half-remembered language. "Sarah, Mrs. Henderson said softly, "What is that thing?" Sarah looked down at the bracelet, as if seeing it clearly for the first time in years. In truth, she had worn it so long that it had become simply part of her, as familiar and unremarkable as her own skin. But now, surrounded by staring faces and feeling the weight of secrets she had carried for so long, she began to speak. My family has many stories, she said quietly. Stories that most people would call legends or fairy tales. About the old times when the world was different, when bloodlines meant more than titles, and symbols carried real power. Marcus was shaking his head slowly, as if trying to deny what he was seeing. The line was broken, he muttered. The last bearer died 200 years ago. The histories are clear. Histories can be wrong, Sarah replied, especially when those who write them have reasons to hide the truth. The standoff in the courtyard stretched on as villagers tried to understand what was happening. They could see that the bracelet was significant in some way that went beyond its obvious age, but the meaning remained frustratingly out of reach. Thomas the blacksmith, a large man with arms like tree trunks from years of working the forge, finally broke the silence. I don't care about ancient symbols or noble bloodlines, he said firmly. I care about the woman who helped my wife when she was sick last winter, who never asked for payment beyond a kind word. If this man wants to take her, he'll have to go through us. A murmur of agreement rose from the gathered villagers. They might not understand the supernatural implications of what they had witnessed, but they understood loyalty and justice. Sarah had been one of them for 3 years, and they would not abandon her now. Marcus seemed to be regaining some of his composure, though his eyes never left the bracelet. You're all making a mistake, he warned. You don't know what forces you're meddling with. That woman is more dangerous than you can imagine. But his words no longer carried the authority they had before. The revelation of the bracelet had shifted something fundamental in the balance of power, even if none of them fully understood what. Sarah looked around at the faces of the people who had become her friends and neighbors. These simple, honest folk were prepared to risk everything to protect her, not because of what she had been born as, but because of who she had chosen to become. The realization filled her with both gratitude and a deep sense of responsibility. There are things you need to know, she said to the gathered crowd, about who I really am and about what this bracelet represents. But first, I need to know if you're prepared for the truth. Because once you hear it, there will be no going back to the simple life this village has known. Father William stepped forward, his weathered hands clasped behind his back. Truth is always preferable to ignorance, child. Whatever burden you carry, you don't have to bear it alone. Sarah nodded slowly, then looked directly at Marcus. And you, she said, are you prepared to hear the full story? Because I think you know that there's more to this than a simple matter of criminal justice. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Speak. The marketplace had fallen completely silent now, even the normal sounds of daily life seeming to pause as the villagers waited to learn the truth about the woman they thought they knew. Sarah took a deep breath and began to speak, her words carrying clearly across the courtyard. The bracelet you see here is one of 7 artifacts known as the Sovereign Seal. Each piece was created over 1,000 years ago during the reign of the first true king of this land. They were meant to ensure that the realm would always have rightful leadership, that power would pass only to those worthy of it. She paused, watching the faces around her process this information. Most looked skeptical, but Marcus's expression suggested he knew she was telling the truth. The legend says that when all 7 pieces are brought together, they will reveal the true heir to the throne, not by bloodline alone, but by worthiness, by the character and choices of the bearer. Fairy tales, someone in the crowd muttered, but the words lacked conviction. Sarah smiled sadly. I thought so too, until 3 years ago, until the night my father was executed for treason, and this bracelet saved my life. The story was beginning to unfold, layer by layer, revealing depths that none of them had suspected. But even as Sarah spoke, she was aware that the most shocking revelations were yet to come. The morning air grew heavy with unspoken questions as Sarah continued her revelation. The villagers shifted restlessly, their simple world suddenly expanded to include ancient magic and royal bloodlines. Marcus stood frozen, his earlier confidence replaced by a wariness that bordered on fear. My father, Lord Edgar Ravencrest, was indeed charged with treason, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the painful memories. But The truth was far more complex than the histories will tell. He had discovered something about the current royal family, something that threatened their claim to the throne. She lifted her wrist slightly, letting the ancient bracelet catch the morning sunlight. This was my grandmother's dying gift to me, passed down through generations of women who kept it secret. She told me stories, but I dismissed them as the fantasies of an old woman. Until the night, everything changed. Father William leaned forward, his scholarly mind engaged despite his shock. "What kind of stories, child?" "Stories about the true purpose of the sovereign seal," Sarah replied. "How it was created not just to identify worthy rulers, but to protect the realm from those who would claim power through deception or force. The bracelet is said to reveal truth in times of great need, and to protect its bearer from those who would do them harm." Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "The night of your father's execution. I was there. I saw what happened." The memory was clearly painful for him to recall, but he continued. "Your father was to be hanged at dawn for his supposed crimes. But when they brought him to the gallows, something extraordinary occurred. The executioner's rope broke, not once, but 3 times. The crowd began to murmur about divine intervention." Sarah nodded grimly. "And then you arrived with your soldiers to ensure the sentence was carried out." "I had my orders," Marcus said defensively, but there was something else in his voice now. Doubt, perhaps, or regret. "The king had commanded that your father's execution proceed no matter what obstacles arose. I was to use my own sword if necessary." The villagers listened in horrified fascination as the story unfolded. Mrs. Henderson clutched her shawl more tightly around her shoulders, while Thomas the blacksmith's massive hands clenched into fists. "Tell them what happened next," Sarah said quietly. Marcus was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on some distant point. When he spoke, his words came slowly, as if each one was being dragged from unwilling lips. "I raised my sword to carry out the execution myself, but as I brought it down, there was a flash of light. Blinding, impossible light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. When my vision cleared, your father lay dead, but not from my blade." He paused, running a hand through his dark hair. He had died of natural causes, peacefully, as if he had simply chosen that moment to release his hold on life. "And you were gone, vanished as completely as if you had never been there at all." Sarah smiled sadly at the memory. "I remember that night differently. I was hidden in the crowd, wearing a hooded cloak, carrying nothing but the clothes on my back and this bracelet. When the light flashed, I felt a pull, a compulsion I couldn't resist. The next thing I knew, I was standing on a road 10 miles away with no memory of how I had gotten there." "Magic," breathed young Anna, the Fletcher's daughter. "Real magic." "Perhaps," Sarah said, "or perhaps something that simply appears magical because we don't understand it. The bracelet has protected me many times over the past 3 years, hidden me from pursuit, guided me to safety, even provided for my basic needs when I had nothing." Father William cleared his throat. "You mentioned 7 artifacts. Do you know where the others are?" "Some of them," Sarah admitted. "My father spent years researching their locations before his death. 3 are held by noble families who may not even know their true significance. 2 more are in the possession of the crown itself, kept in the royal treasury as mere curiosities. And 1," she glanced at Marcus, who had gone very still. "1 is carried by Lord Marcus Blackwood. Isn't that right, my lord?" The accusation hit the gathering like a thunderclap. Marcus's hand moved instinctively to his throat, where a thin chain disappeared beneath his shirt. His face had gone pale, and for a moment it looked as if he might deny the claim. Instead, he slowly reached up and pulled the chain free. Hanging from it was a pendant that matched Sarah's bracelet in age and craftsmanship. Where her artifact bore symbols of protection and concealment, his was marked with emblems of strength and dominion. "The Warlord's Stone," Sarah said, naming it. "It grants its bearer exceptional skill in battle and the loyalty of those who follow them." "How long have you carried it, Marcus?" "Since I was 16, he admitted reluctantly. "It was my father's deathbed gift, and his father's before that. I was told it was a family heirloom, nothing more. But even as he spoke, both he and Sarah could see the lie in his words. A man didn't become the most feared warrior in 3 kingdoms through training alone, nor inspire such unwavering loyalty from his soldiers through charisma. The pendant's power had shaped his entire life, just as the bracelet had protected Sarah's. This is why you were so determined to capture me, Sarah realized. Not just for revenge or to complete submission. The artifacts call to each other. You've felt it, haven't you? The pull, the need to find the other pieces? Marcus nodded slowly. For 3 years, I've been driven by dreams I couldn't explain. Visions of a woman with ancient symbols, always just out of reach. I told myself I was hunting you for justice, but the truth is that I had no choice. The stone wouldn't let me rest until I found you. The revelation sent ripples of unease through the gathered villagers. They were beginning to understand that they had stumbled into something far larger and more dangerous than a simple manhunt. Ancient artifacts with mysterious powers, bloodlines, and prophecies, the very legitimacy of the crown itself. These were matters that could reshape the kingdom. What happens now? Asked Father William. If these artifacts are as powerful as you suggest, surely the king and his advisors must know of them. Sarah and Marcus exchanged a look that was heavy with shared understanding. King Aldrich knows, Marcus said grimly. He's known for years. Why do you think he was so eager to eliminate Lord Edgar Ravencrest? It wasn't because of any real treason. It was because Edgar had gotten too close to the truth about the royal bloodline. What truth? Mrs. Henderson asked, though her tone suggested she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Sarah took a deep breath before answering. King Aldrich's family has ruled for 5 generations, but their claim to the throne is based on a lie. They are not descended from the true royal line. They seized power during a period of chaos and have maintained it through force and deception ever since. The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything the villagers had believed about their world. Kings were ordained by divine right, weren't they? The natural order of things, as unchanging as the seasons? My father discovered records proving that the last true heir died without children, Sarah continued. The current royal family forged documents and eliminated anyone who might challenge their claim. But they couldn't destroy the sovereign seal because they didn't understand its true purpose. Marcus was nodding slowly. The artifacts weren't just meant to identify royal bloodline. They were designed to choose the most worthy ruler from among all the people. Birth matters less than character, less than the willingness to serve rather than be served. And the 7 pieces together? Father William prompted. Together, they have the power to reveal who should truly rule, Sarah said. But more than that, they can grant that person the authority and wisdom needed to heal the kingdom's wounds, to unite the fractured noble houses and bring real peace to the land. Thomas the blacksmith stepped forward, his weathered face creased with concern. That's all very grand, but what does it mean for us? For simple folk who just want to live our lives in peace. It was Sarah who answered. It means that the war that's been brewing for years, the conflicts between the great houses that have already cost so many lives, could finally end. Or if it could get much worse, depending on what we do with this knowledge. War? Several voices asked at once. Marcus nodded grimly. King Aldrich's rule grows more unstable each year. The noble houses are choosing sides, building armies, preparing for civil war. He knows his time is limited, which is why he's grown so desperate to eliminate any potential threats to his authority. Like the daughter of Lord Edgar Ravencrest, someone muttered. Exactly, and like anyone who carries a piece of the sovereign seal. Marcus's hand moved protectively to his pendant. I've been walking a very dangerous line for years, serving a king who would kill me instantly if he knew what I carried. Sarah studied his face carefully. Then, why haven't you used the stone's power to overthrow him yourself? With your reputation and the loyalty it grants you, you could probably raise half the kingdom's armies. The question clearly made Marcus uncomfortable. He was quiet for a long moment before answering. Because I know what I am. I'm a weapon, a tool for war and conquest. The stone chose me because I was born to fight, not to rule. I would be no better than Aldrich, perhaps worse. At least he has the sense to surround himself with advisors and administrators. But the artifacts could choose someone else, Father William suggested. Someone better suited to leadership. Perhaps, Sarah agreed, if we could gather all 7 pieces. But consider what that would mean. To challenge a king's authority, to claim that divine right is meaningless next to actual worth. We would be starting a war that would consume the entire kingdom. The weight of the decision settled over the group like a heavy cloak. These simple villagers had awakened to find themselves at the center of a struggle that could reshape their world. The comfortable certainties of their lives have been stripped away, replaced by impossible choices and terrible responsibilities. Young, Anna spoke up from the edge of the group. But what if doing nothing means the war happens anyway? You said the king's rule is unstable. If these artifacts could prevent that, don't we have a duty to try? It was a surprisingly mature observation from someone barely 16 years old, and it struck at the heart of their dilemma. Sarah found herself looking at the girl with new respect. There would be risks, she warned. Terrible risks. Anyone involved would be marked as traitors. Their families, their communities, everyone they care about would be in danger. We're already in danger, Mrs. Henderson pointed out. Just by knowing what we know now, you think King Aldrich will let us live with this secret? Marcus was forced to agree. She's right. The moment I return without you, Isabella, questions will be asked. And when the truth comes out about what you carry, about what I carry, this village will be burned to the ground as an example to others. The stark reality of their situation began to sink in. There was no going back to ignorance, no return to the simple life they had known that morning. They were committed now, whether they wanted to be or not. Father William straightened his shoulders with the resolve of a man who had faced difficult choices before. Then we must decide. Do we run, scatter to the 4 winds, and hope to escape notice? Or do we stand and fight for something better? Fight how? Thomas asked practically. We're farmers and merchants. What can we do against kings and armies? Sarah smiled, and for the first time since Marcus's arrival, there was real hope in her expression. We could do what my father started. We can find the other pieces of the sovereign seal. And we can discover who the artifacts believe should rule in Aldrich's place. A quest, Anna breathed, her young imagination already captured by the adventure of it. A very dangerous quest, Marcus corrected firmly. The other artifacts are scattered across the kingdom, some in the hands of people who will kill to keep them. The king has spies everywhere, and armies at his command. We would be hunted from the moment we began. Then, we'll need to be clever, Sarah said. And we'll need allies. People who are as tired of Aldrich's rule as we are, who would risk everything for a chance at real change. She looked around the group, meeting each person's eyes. But I won't ask anyone to follow this path unwillingly. The choice must be made freely, with full understanding of the costs. Mrs. Henderson was the first to speak. I've lived through 40 years of King Aldrich's rule. I've seen good men hanged for speaking truth to power, watched families torn apart by wars that serve no purpose but to feed the king's pride. If there's a chance to change that, I'll take it. One by one, the others voiced their agreement. Thomas, despite his practical concerns, admitted that he was tired of watching his friend's sons march off to die in pointless conflicts. Father William spoke of his duty to protect his flock, which now meant protecting them from their own king. Even young Anna, despite the protests of her father, insisted that she wanted to be part of something that mattered. Finally, all eyes turned to Marcus. His decision would be perhaps the most crucial, as his military knowledge and the power of the Warlord Stone would be essential to their success. I've spent my entire adult life serving a lie, he said slowly, using my skills to enforce the will of a usurper who has no right to the throne he sits on. Perhaps it's time I serve the truth instead. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension as their unlikely alliance took shape. They were committed now to a course of action that would either save the kingdom or destroy them all. The stakes couldn't be higher, and the odds against success seemed overwhelming. But As she looked at the determined faces around her, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years of hiding and running. She felt hope. "Then, we begin today," she announced. "We'll need supplies, information about the location of the other artifacts, and a plan for staying ahead of the king's forces. Most importantly, we'll need to find trustworthy allies who can help us on this journey." Marcus was already thinking strategically. "I know several noble houses that have grown tired of Aldrich rule. Lord Ashford, who governs this region, has been quietly building alliances with others who share his concerns. If we can convince him of our cause, he could provide resources and protection. And I know the common folk," Mrs. Henderson added. "The merchants and farmers who travel the roads between towns. They hear everything and see everything. They'll know where the artifacts are hidden, who guards them, and what weaknesses might be exploited." Father William nodded thoughtfully. "The church has its own networks. Priests and monks who serve in noble houses, who hear confessions and witness the private moments of the powerful. They might be willing to help if the cause is just." The planning session stretched on as the sun climbed higher in the sky. Maps were drawn in the dirt, names were whispered, and strategies were debated. Sarah found herself working closely with Marcus, their former animosity replaced by a shared sense of purpose. As the morning turned to afternoon, the magnitude of their undertaking became clearer. They weren't just planning to find a few ancient artifacts. They were preparing to challenge the fundamental order of their world, to topple a dynasty that had ruled for 5 generations. It would require courage, cunning, and more luck than any reasonable person had a right to expect. But, for the first time in years, the people of Millbrook Village felt like they were working towards something greater than their own survival. The revolution had begun with 7 simple words from a young woman with a secret. "There are things you need to know." 3 weeks had passed since that fateful morning in the marketplace, and the quiet village of Millbrook had become the unlikely center of a growing rebellion. What had started as a handful of determined villagers had expanded into a network of allies stretching across 3 provinces. Sarah, no longer hiding her true identity as Lady Isabella Ravencrest, had emerged as the natural leader of their cause. The old grain storage building had been converted into their headquarters, its thick stone walls providing both security and secrecy for their planning sessions. Maps covered every available surface, marked with the locations of the remaining artifacts and the movements of potential allies and enemies alike. The transformation was remarkable. Simple farmers and merchants had become spies and strategists, their peaceful lives forever changed by the knowledge they now carried. Marcus stood before a large map of the kingdom, pointing to various marked locations as he briefed the assembled group. His relationship with Sarah had evolved from hunter and prey to trusted allies, though the tension between them hadn't entirely disappeared. The weight of their shared destiny created its own complex dynamics. "Lord Ashford has confirmed his support," Marcus announced to the gathered conspirators. "He's provided safe houses along the eastern trade routes, and promised to delay any royal investigators who come looking for us. But he warns that King Aldrich is becoming increasingly suspicious of anyone showing unusual interest in historical artifacts." Sarah nodded from her position near the window, where she kept watch for unexpected visitors. The simple brown dress had been replaced with practical traveling clothes, and the humble baker's assistant had given way to the confident bearing of a woman born to command. "What news from the Northern Territories?" she asked. Father William consulted his notes, written in the coded script he had developed for communicating with his fellow priests. "Brother Marcus at Northfield Abbey reports that the healer's ring is indeed held by Lady Catherine Moorfield, just as your father's research indicated. However, she's kept it locked away in her family vault for the past decade, considering it nothing more than an inherited curiosity. Lady Catherine has reason to distrust the crown," Mrs. Henderson added. "Her eldest son was killed in one of Aldrich's pointless border wars last year. If we approach her carefully, she might be willing to join our cause." The ring Mrs. Henderson mentioned was one of the 7 artifacts they sought, a delicate silver band set with a stone that supposedly could heal both physical wounds and the deeper injuries to the soul. Sarah's research suggested it would be essential for whoever ultimately took the throne, as the kingdom would need significant healing after years of Aldrich's misrule. Thomas the blacksmith entered the room carrying a leather satchel, his massive frame barely fitting through the doorway. "News from the capital," he announced grimly. "The merchant guilds are reporting increased activity around the royal treasury. Seems King Aldrich has been examining the artifacts in his possession more closely than usual." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. He knows something. The question is how much. Marcus was already thinking tactically. If he's realized the true nature of what he holds, he'll be looking for the other pieces. That makes our mission both more urgent and more dangerous. The two artifacts currently in the royal treasury were the Crown of Wisdom and the Scepter of Justice, perhaps the most powerful pieces of a sovereign's seal. According to legend, the crown granted its wearer the ability to see through deception and understand the true needs of their people, while the scepter ensured that their decisions would be guided by fairness rather than personal gain. Young Anna, who had proven surprisingly adept at gathering intelligence despite her father's continued protests about her involvement, spoke up from her corner where she was sorting through coded messages. "There's something else. My contacts among the servant girls at various noble houses report strange dreams plaguing their masters. Dreams about ancient symbols and voices calling them to seek out old family heirlooms." "The artifacts are awakening," Sarah said quietly. "They know that the time of choosing is approaching." Father William looked troubled. "If the other bearers are experiencing the same compulsion that drew you and Lord Marcus together, it could work in our favor. But it also means King Aldrich's spies will be monitoring any unusual behavior among the nobility." The complexity of their situation was becoming increasingly apparent. They weren't just racing against time to gather the artifacts. They were competing against a king who had far greater resources and whose desperation was making him increasingly dangerous. A soft knock at the door interrupted their planning. Sarah tensed, her hand moving instinctively toward the concealed dagger at her side, but Mrs. Henderson's gentle smile indicated the visitor was expected. "That will be our guest from the western provinces," she said, moving to answer the door. The woman who entered was perhaps 40 years old, with silver-streaked hair and the weathered hands of someone accustomed to hard work. Her clothes marked her as a successful merchant, prosperous but not ostentatious. What caught everyone's attention, however, was the way she carried herself, with the unconscious authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Lady Margaret Thornfield," she announced herself, though her tone suggested the title was more burden than privilege. "I understand you're looking for allies in your cause against King Aldrich." Sarah studied the newcomer carefully. Lady Margaret controlled significant trade networks throughout the western provinces and commanded the loyalty of numerous merchant families. Her support would be invaluable, but her motives remained unclear. "What brings you to our cause?" Sarah asked directly. Margaret's smile was grim. "The same thing that brings most people to rebellion: personal loss. My husband and younger brother died in Aldrich's war against the northern kingdoms 2 years ago. A war fought solely to distract attention from failed harvests and increased taxation. Since then, I've been quietly building a network of like-minded individuals." She reached into her traveling bag and withdrew a familiar object, a silver chain bearing an ornate pendant. Sarah's breath caught as she recognized the symbols carved into its surface. "The merchant's seal," Marcus breathed. "You carry the third piece." Margaret nodded. "It's been in my family for generations, passed down through the women of the line. I never understood its significance until 3 weeks ago, when I began having the dreams your young friend mentioned. Dreams that led me here to you." The convergence of 3 artifacts in one place created a palpable energy in the room. Sarah could feel her bracelet growing warm against her skin, while Marcus unconsciously touched his pendant. The very air seemed to vibrate with potential. "How many more will come?" Father William wondered aloud. "That depends on how quickly we can find them before King Aldrich does," Sarah replied. "Margaret, what can you tell us about the movements of royal forces in your territory?" The merchant's expression darkened. Aldrich has tripled the number of tax collectors and royal guards throughout the western provinces. They're conducting house-to-house searches under the pretext of looking for smuggled goods, but they're clearly searching for something specific. Several noble families have been arrested on trumped-up charges in the past week. He's looking for the artifacts, Marcus concluded, which means our time is running short. Sarah moved to the central map and studied the marked locations of their remaining targets. We need to split our forces. 2 teams, moving simultaneously to collect the remaining pieces before the king can reach them. It's risky, but it's our only chance. I'll lead one team north to Lady Catherine. Marcus volunteered. My military background and the authority of the warlord Stone should help convince her to join us. And I'll take the other team to retrieve the artifacts from the royal treasury itself, Sarah said calmly. The room erupted in protests. Even Marcus, who had seen her courage firsthand, looked shocked at the audacity of the proposal. That's suicide, Thomas declared bluntly. The royal palace is the most heavily guarded fortress in the kingdom. Not suicide, Sarah corrected. Necessary. The crown and scepter are too important to leave in Aldrich's hands, and we have advantages he doesn't know about. She lifted her wrist to display the bracelet. This has protected me for 3 years, hidden me from pursuit when all hope seemed lost. With Margaret's resources and connections, we can create a plan that takes advantage of the palace's own routines against it. Margaret was nodding slowly. My merchant networks have contract to supply the royal kitchens and maintain the palace gardens. I can get a small team inside without raising suspicions. The servants' areas connect to the treasury level through maintenance passages, Mrs. Henderson added unexpectedly. When everyone looked at her in surprise, she smiled. I worked in the royal kitchens for 2 years in my youth, before I married and came to Millbrook. I know those passages better than most of the current guards. The plan began to take shape as they discussed details. It would require precise timing, multiple diversions, and more luck than any reasonable person should count on. But it was possible just barely. Father William raised a concern that had been troubling him. Even if we succeed in gathering all 7 artifacts, what then? We've been assuming they'll choose a worthy ruler, but what if they choose someone we don't expect? What if they choose someone who doesn't want the responsibility? It was a question that had haunted Sarah's thoughts as well. The artifacts were said to judge worthiness by character rather than birth or ambition. They might very well choose someone completely unexpected, a farmer, perhaps, or a simple priest. Someone who would be horrified at the prospect of ruling a kingdom. Then, we'll deal with that when it happens, she said finally. Our first responsibility is to remove Aldrich from power before his misrule destroys the kingdom entirely. After that, we'll face whatever challenges arise. Anna looked up from her messages. There's something else we need to consider. What if King Aldrich has discovered how to use the artifacts he already possesses? The Crown of Wisdom could help him identify our agents, and the Scepter of Justice might be turned to his own purposes if he's learned its secrets. The thought was chilling. If Aldrich could access the true power of the artifacts, their rebellion might be doomed before it truly began. But it also suggested an opportunity. The artifacts judge worthiness, Marcus said slowly. If Aldrich is truly as corrupt as we believe, they should resist his attempts to use them. They might even work against him. Margaret smiled grimly. For what I've heard through my merchant contacts, the king has been experiencing increasingly severe headaches whenever he wears the crown for extended periods. His advisors believe it's the stress of leadership, but perhaps it's something more. Sarah felt a spark of hope. If the artifacts were indeed resisting Aldrich's attempts to use them, it would level the playing field considerably. But it also made their mission more urgent. A desperate king might do anything to eliminate threats to his power. The meeting continued late into the evening as they finalized their plans. 2 teams would depart the next morning, racing against time, and the king's forces to gather the remaining pieces of the sovereign seal. The fate of the kingdom would depend on their success or failure. As the group began to disperse to their various lodgings around the village, Sarah found herself alone with Marcus for the first time in days. The weight of leadership and the constant presence of others had made private conversation nearly impossible. "Do you really think we can succeed?" she asked quietly. Marcus was silent for a moment, his hand moving unconsciously to touch his pendant. 3 weeks ago, I would have said no. The idea of overthrowing a king with nothing but ancient artifacts and the support of common folk would have seemed like madness. And now? Now I've seen what happens when ordinary people decide they've had enough of being powerless. Your villagers have shown more courage than most of the knights I've commanded. If bravery and determination count for anything, we have a real chance." Sarah smiled at the sincerity in his voice. The arrogant nobleman who had arrived in Millbrook 3 weeks ago had been transformed by their shared cause. The artifacts had chosen well when they brought them together. "There's something I need to tell you," Marcus continued, "about that night 3 years ago when your father died." Sarah tensed, unsure she wanted to hear whatever revelation was coming. "I told you that he died peacefully, naturally, just as I was about to strike. But that wasn't the whole truth." In those final moments, as the light flashed around us, he spoke. Just a few words, but they've haunted me ever since. "What did he say?" Marcus met her eyes directly. He said, "The true heir will be revealed when the seven are united. Seek her, protect her, and prepare for the restoration." He was looking directly at you when he said it, Isabella. Even then, even facing death, he knew what you would become. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her father had known, had understood her destiny even as his own life ended. The weight of expectation and responsibility settled on her shoulders like a mantle of lead. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" she whispered. "Because I wasn't sure I believed it. And because I thought you had enough burdens to carry without adding my uncertainties to them. But now, seeing what you've accomplished, seeing how people respond to your leadership, I think your father was right." Sarah looked down at the bracelet on her wrist, its ancient symbols seeming to pulse with their own inner light. The artifacts had brought her this far, through years of exile and hiding, through the terror of discovery and the formation of their rebellion. Perhaps they were guiding her towards something even greater. "Tomorrow we'll know if our gamble pays off," she said finally. "Either we'll have taken a crucial step toward victory, or we'll have revealed ourselves completely to our enemies." Marcus nodded. "Whatever happens, it's been an honor to serve beside you, Isabella. Your father would be proud of the woman you've become." As Sarah prepared for what might be her final night of sleep before the most dangerous mission of her life, she reflected on the strange turns her path had taken. From exile and hiding to leadership of a rebellion, from baker's assistant to potential heir to the throne. The journey had been impossible to predict, guided by forces she barely understood. But tomorrow would bring answers. Tomorrow, they would discover whether the artifacts truly could choose a worthy ruler for their troubled kingdom. Tomorrow, the revolution would either succeed spectacularly or fail catastrophically. Sarah touched her bracelet one last time before settling down to sleep, wondering what dreams the ancient magic might send her in the hours before dawn.